Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kim and on my channel I'm talking about books. Today I wanted to talk to you about a book that has just been released, Japanese Gothic by Kylie Lee Baker. I genuinely can't stop thinking about this book ever since I finished it because of how beautifully this book combines something so horrific and gore with something that is so deeply emotional and tragic. This was one of my most anticipated reads for 2026 because I absolutely loved The Scarlet Alchemist. This is one of my favorite fantasy reads because of how dark it is and how it combined these dark elements with fantasy. So naturally my expectations for this book were extremely high, and at the same time I was also very curious because this is a completely different genre than the fantasy book I read. This leans so much more into the psychological horror and ghost story territory. If anything, this book convinced me that Kylie Lee Baker is such a versatile writer because the atmosphere in this story was phenomenal. From the very first pages, there is this lingering sense of unease, and you get the feeling that something is really deeply off. A lot of things in the story also kind of feel surreal, especially in the presence of an unreliable narrator. And I had this constant feeling of wanting to know what exactly was going on and how these stories were intertwined. Because in this novel, you are following along two timelines which are intertwined, not in time but in place. And in 2026, we are following along Lee, and in the beginning of the story, which is also in the blurb of the book, we learn that he just murdered his roommate, which is already kind of an unsettling premise. But the thing that makes it even more disturbing is the fact that he doesn't remember why he killed his roommate, and he cannot remember where he put the body. Lee is addicted to sleeping pills, his memories feel unstable, his perception constantly shifts, and because of that, the story itself also becomes dreamlike. There were moments where I genuinely couldn't figure out whether things are actually happening or whether you are witnessing someone's psychological deterioration under the weight of a lot of guilt, trauma, and addiction. Honestly, I absolutely loved this ambiguity because it made the story so much more layered. So after the murder, Lee decides to run away to his father's isolated and remote house, which is somewhere in the woods in Japan. And this house becomes a very important part in the story. It feels like the house is carrying memories and grief and inherited trauma. In the second timeline, we follow San, and San is living in the late 1800s, and she is being raised by her father according very strict samurai rules. While her father himself is one of the last standing samurai warriors who is being hunted down in an era where there is a large political shift happening in Japan. And both storylines are filled with fear and isolation and in some way a way of survival. But underneath all of this psychological horror, this story is exploring something very human and emotional. What completely broke my heart throughout this novel is how both Sen and Lee are consumed by the need to live up to the expectations of their parents, especially their fathers. They are constantly sacrificing themselves again and again because they believe their word is dependent on obedience and loyalty to their fathers. And I think that was one of the most devastating aspects, that both Sen and Lee are suppressing their own needs just to be considered to be enough. And that emotional core is what absolutely elevates this story. What I also found very fascinating and what I think Kylie Lee Baker is immaculate at is how contradictory the writing felt. Her writing is very lyrical, almost like a delicate prose style, but then she is sprinkling this grotesque and visceral gore details in between, and you would think these two would kind of clash, but that absolutely was what made the story for me. Let's also talk about the fact that I have read this book within 48 hours. I have used a lot of tabs in here. Every single time I put the book down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to know what was going on. I was completely emotionally involved. And the mystery surrounding both Lee and Sen and the house and the intertwined plot lines just constantly pulled me and dragged me further into this story. The connection between Sen and Lee felt so immersive and so unreal and surreal at the same time. Throughout the story, nothing is ever fully explained. You will get the whole picture by the end of the story, but throughout the story, you will just keep wondering what is going on. There's always this lingering uncertainty: what is real, what is just imagination, and what is an effect of the imagination of heavily traumatized people and just a psychological collapse. I personally love that the story is keeping you guessing instead of just handing it out to you. I think that is also massively contributing to the overall atmosphere in this book. The isolation of the house, the silence surrounding the house, everything just felt extremely vivid without being over explained. So, overall, I adored this book. I think that if you enjoy a psychological horror that leans heavily into atmosphere, emotional depth, then this book is absolutely for you. It's definitely not a light read. The gore can be extremely detailed, and emotionally, this book felt very heavy to me. I think this just confirmed that Kylie Lee Baker is becoming one of my favorite authors. I haven't read The Bed Eater yet, but I will definitely look into that one because I think she clearly understands how to write a story that is both emotionally devastating, horrific, and completely immersive at the same time. If you are still here at the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear from you if you have read this book yet or if you are planning on picking it up. Let me know in the comments and then I will see you in the next video.